So my passion and the work of the Centre for Early Childhood stems from one essential truth: that the love we feel in our earliest years fundamentally shapes who we become and how we thrive as adults.
Catherine, Princess of Wales, came out that day expecting a routine public visit, not knowing she would soon be standing just steps away from something that could change everything. The day began as one of those royal outings that rarely draw attention beyond polite applause and camera flashes. Catherine, Princess of Wales, came to Windsor for a community-focused visit tied to early childhood development. She stepped from the car smiling, nodding, and taking a moment longer with children who had been waiting since morning. Prince William joined her shortly after, moving a few steps behind as senior protection officers spread out in their familiar pattern. They were close enough to react, but also far enough not to be seen.
And I felt, you're losing people every single time you have those headlines. We all get that there's a really big urgent message, and I'm not...
Nothing about the scene suggested danger. Members of the Royal Protection Command were already in position. The Metropolitan Police had secured the surrounding streets, and local officers made themselves part of the crowd. Catherine spoke briefly with a local teacher, then turned toward a small group of parents who had been invited inside. It was at that moment something unexpected happened. A small device, later confirmed to be able to cause serious harm, dropped from above the crowd line and hit the ground just feet from where Catherine stood. It was sudden, and it cut across the scenes. As one witness would describe it later, it was so fast, many did not even notice it. The device did not detonate, but the danger was real. Officers moved in without shouting or panic, forming a tight barrier around the Princess of Wales while guiding her and Prince William back toward the car. One senior officer, later identified in court documents only as Officer Lewis, was seen shielding Catherine with his own body as others secured the area. Within seconds, the scene shifted from public engagement to controlled emergency response. The crowd was pushed back and specialist units were called in from the Metropolitan Police Explosives Ordnance Disposal Team. Catherine was moved to a secure location nearby. William stayed close, speaking with officers before joining her. What shocked royal watchers later was not only how close the device came, but who the alleged attacker turned out to be. Early assumptions leaned toward an outside extremist or a disturbed lone actor with no direct access. That theory fell apart within hours. Investigators traced the device's path and discovered it had been released from a building overlooking the engagement area. It was a building that had been cleared days earlier as part of routine security checks. That detail alone raised serious questions both in the palace and among the police. By evening, a suspect was taken into custody without public announcement. It was a man known to authorities but not previously flagged as a direct threat to the royal family. Court records later referred to him as Martin Hale, a civilian contractor who had worked indirectly on site logistics earlier that week. He was not part of the royal household, but he had passed background checks required for temporary access to restricted areas. That was a fact that was suspicious among security circles. Shortly after, King Charles was briefed while at Sandringham, as Queen Camilla joined the call. Sources close to the family said the king was visibly shaken, not only by the threat to Catherine but by the implications of how close it came. Princess Anne, long known for her blunt assessments of security failures, reportedly demanded a full review, reminding officials of her own kidnapping attempt decades earlier. On the night of March 20th, 1974, Princess Anne was returning to Buckingham Palace.
Unbeknownst to us, his gun jammed, so that he became useless, and he was also quite seriously wounded at that stage.
After a charity event, she was riding in a limousine with her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips, when another car suddenly blocked their vehicle on the Mall in London. A man named Ian Ball got out of the car and approached the limousine with a gun. His plan was to kidnap Princess Anne and demand a ransom of about £2 million. She remembered the incident and warned against complacency. Catherine, who had maintained composure throughout the incident, was said to be deeply concerned less for herself and more for the children who had been nearby. She asked repeatedly whether anyone else had been hurt and requested updates on the families who had been moved from the area. The Metropolitan Police confirmed that the device, though small, had the potential to cause fatal injuries at close range. Officials avoided technical details, but emphasized that timing and immediate response prevented a tragedy. MII-5 was brought in to assess whether the act was part of a wider network or a lone attempt fueled by personal grievance. Early findings gave birth to some theories, but investigators were careful not to rule anything out. As news slowly filtered out, public reaction became intense. Questions followed about whether Catherine's high visibility and her growing influence within the monarchy had made her a specific target. Palace aides refused to speculate, but privately acknowledged that her role had expanded in recent years. By the next morning, additional security measures were put in place around Catherine and her children. School routes were adjusted, staff movements reviewed, and upcoming engagements reassessed.
Just about happy, healthy children. This is about the society I hope we could and can become.
And as investigators began piecing together how a trusted system had allowed such a moment, the only question was whether this incident was truly isolated, or only the first crack in something far more serious. The morning after the incident, Catherine returned to Kensington Palace. Security was tighter than ever, and even the palace staff felt the weight of what had nearly happened. William stayed close, insisting on walking alongside her, while officers moved ahead, checking every turn and every corner. Inside, Catherine went to a private study, reviewing reports from the Metropolitan Police and the Royal Protection Command. The documents outlined every step of the event, from how the device had been planted to how Hale had gained temporary access. Catherine read quietly, her face calm, but the lines around her eyes suggested she was thinking fast and processing risk in ways most people could not imagine. Despite the danger, she insisted on continuing some engagements that week, though they were smaller and more controlled. One of her first stops was a local nursery that had been part of her early childhood program. Parents and children had been evacuated during the attack, and she wanted to meet them again, to reassure them personally. She spoke softly with the toddlers, bending to their height, her hands steady, her eyes scanning the room unconsciously for anything unusual. Even in a room filled with laughter and chatter, Catherine moved with precision. Meanwhile, William was in constant contact with intelligence officers, demanding answers about how someone like Hale had slipped through. King Charles and Queen Camilla had flown in for brief consultations.
So you can't be the same as the sovereign if you're the Prince of Wales or the heir.
Charles reportedly told William during a private call, "We must understand how this happened and ensure it never happens again. Catherine's safety is not negotiable." It was a rare display of raw emotion from the king, who usually approached these matters formally. Investigators discovered that Hale had grown increasingly fixated on the royal family over the past year. Surveillance footage showed him visiting multiple public areas associated with Catherine, often under the guise of official business or casual observation. Officers described him as methodical, calculating, and patient, willing to wait for months to find the perfect moment. That knowledge made Catherine's team rethink every protocol, every route she took, and every interaction with crowds. Nothing could be left to chance anymore. The palace also convened a private meeting with senior royals, including Prince Harry, who had flown in from his residence in the United States. Though their relationship had been complicated in recent years, Harry reportedly expressed relief that Catherine had not been harmed and offered suggestions from his own experiences managing public scrutiny and security risks. Princess Anne attended via video call, her voice sharp and direct, pressing for immediate reviews of every security layer, from temporary staff clearance to crowd barriers. "We cannot allow familiarity to breed risk," she said, reminding everyone that past incidents had often started small but escalated quickly. Catherine, for her part, still did not allow fear to dictate her schedule.
I've seen that experiences such as homelessness, addiction, and poor mental health.
She insisted on visiting a children's charity later in the week, accompanied by just a few security officers in plain clothes. Her presence was deliberate. She wanted to maintain normalcy while signaling that she would not be intimidated. Observers later noted the confidence in her posture, how she moved through rooms, greeting staff and children without hesitation. But behind that confidence, she knew every camera angle, every exit, and every route through the building. Nothing about her look suggested panic, but her mind was active, assessing and reassessing risks at all times. And as for Hale, the suspect, he remained in custody as attention turned to what motivated him. He had left online messages expressing admiration for Catherine's public work, mixed with increasingly dark comments about wanting to make a mark, or be remembered. Analysts working with MI5 speculated that he was not acting on behalf of any larger organization, but believed that his actions would force media attention and create an illusion of power he did not have. This made him unpredictable, dangerous in a way that was hard to anticipate. By midweek, a forensic sweep of the area where the device had been found revealed more unsettling details. Traces of chemicals suggested Hale had intended to upgrade the device into something more dangerous, but had failed either through incompetence or misjudgment. This revelation heightened the urgency of reviews across all royal engagements. Catherine's team began creating new contingency plans, including controlled public appearances where she could interact safely without exposing herself.
It's really important to stress that we can't take a fatalistic outlook on this either, for those who haven't had.
To potential threats. Her aides described her as methodical in reviewing these plans, insisting on alternatives, exit strategies, and rapid response procedures. But even with the tension, Catherine maintained moments of humanity. One afternoon, she invited the children she had visited earlier to a small garden at the palace, playing quietly, laughing, and listening to their stories. William watched closely, noting her ability to balance composure with warmth. This combination, many insiders said, was what made her uniquely suited for the public demands of her role. She could remain calm in chaos, but also convey genuine care and attention. These were the qualities that had drawn the public to her long before the attack. Yet despite this careful balance, Catherine could not ignore the unsettling thought of how close the danger had come. She confided privately to a senior aide that the realization of vulnerability was sharpest not in the moment of the incident, but afterward, when silence returned and the world seemed normal again. That reflection, she said, was the hardest because it forced her to consider the unexpected, the hidden, and the calculated ways someone could reach her, despite all the precautions. And as the palace worked to restore confidence, the broader question was how someone who is so involved in royal events could still slip through security. By the end of the week, the palace stopped treating the incident as a near miss and began treating it as a warning.
Mental health is best supported and all those around children and raising the next generation today.
Catherine's schedule did not slow down, but it changed in ways only insiders could see. Routes were shortened, crowds were spaced differently, and every venue was checked more than once. Officers no longer focused only on the ground level. They watched rooftops, windows, and service areas with fresh intensity. Catherine noticed everything, even when no one explained it to her. She met King Charles at Clarence House for a private discussion, one that did not include aides or press staff. Charles spoke plainly, asking how she was sleeping, how the children were coping, and whether she felt ready to continue at the same pace. Catherine answered honestly, saying she was steady but alert, and that she did not want fear to dictate her role. Charles listened carefully, then reminded her that the crown had endured many threats before, but that each one left a mark. He said what mattered was learning fast and adjusting without panic. Prince William joined them later, bringing updates from security officials. The review into Martin Hale's access had uncovered more gaps than expected. Hale had not forced his way in or bypassed alarms. He had been waved through on familiarity alone, a face seen often enough that people stopped asking questions. That detail unsettled everyone in the room. Catherine reacted to this quietly, nodding, asking who signed off on Hale's access, and how often temporary contractors were rechecked once approved. The answers were not comforting. Background checks were done early, but ongoing monitoring was limited. Hale had changed in the months leading up to the incident, but no system flagged it. William pressed the point harder, asking why warning signs in Hale's online behavior had not been caught. Security officers admitted that the amount of data made constant tracking difficult unless a name had already raised concern. Catherine listened, then said something that stayed with those present. In her own words, That danger often comes from the places people stop looking. While these discussions took place, the public only saw small hints that something had shifted. Catherine appeared at a charity center in London, smiling, calm, and fully present. Cameras caught her laughing with volunteers, kneeling to speak with children, and thanking staff by name. What they did not see was the unseen coordination happening around her. Officers were exchanging signals, doors held open longer than usual, and exits kept clear. Catherine moved naturally through it all, but her awareness never dropped. Behind closed doors, Hale's interviews continued. Investigators learned he had built a routine around royal events, attending public visits, studying patterns, and learning how security flowed rather than where it stood. He wrote notes, sketched layouts, and saved photos from social media. None of it was illegal on its own, which made it harder to stop him early. What pushed him further, officers believed, was a sense of invisibility. He felt close to power, yet unseen by it. That frustration fed his actions. Catherine was briefed on these findings one evening, after the children were asleep. She sat with William in a room, reading summaries and timelines. In reaction, she asked how many others had similar access, how often checks would now happen, and whether her own visibility had changed the risk level. William admitted that her influence had grown, especially in areas like early childhood, where policy leaders were paying attention. That visibility, he said, brought both respect and risk. Princess Anne visited the palace the following day. She spoke firmly, reminding Catherine that confidence must never replace caution. She shared details from her own experience, how routine had almost cost her life years ago, and how she learned to stay alert without becoming guarded. Catherine listened closely, appreciating the honesty. The two women spoke at length as people who understood the weight of public duty and private fear. Queen Camilla also checked in, offering support rather than advice. She reminded Catherine that true strength was not about ignoring fear, but about carrying it properly.
It has been an incredibly tough couple of months for our entire family.
That message resonated, especially as Catherine prepared for a visit tied to mental health support for young families. This was her next appearance. She insisted on going ahead, believing the message mattered more than the risk, as long as precautions were in place. As the investigation widened, attention turned to how information about royal movements was shared. Some details had been available longer than necessary, giving people, like Hale, time to plan. Changes were made quickly, tightening release windows and limiting advance notice. Catherine agreed to these changes, even though they reduced public access. She understood that safety sometimes required distance, even when her instinct was to be close. Still, one detail troubled her more than the rest. Hale had chosen a moment when children were present, knowing she would be focused on them. That choice felt personal, calculated, and deeply unsettling. Catherine shared this concern with a senior officer, asking whether future events involving children required extra protection. The answer was yes, and plans were already being revised. As days passed, the immediate shock faded, but the tension did not. Every step forward carried the memory of how easily routine had been exploited. Catherine continued her work, but those closest to her could see the change. She was still warm, still composed, but sharper now. She became quicker to notice and less willing to assume safety where it had once been implied. As Hale's court date approached, pressure grew quietly inside the palace and across the security services. Catherine felt it in small ways, through longer briefings, tighter schedules.
How Scotland's first dedicated design museum is already inspiring the next generation.
And the way officers watched even familiar faces with fresh care. She did not complain, but she noticed everything. Each change reminded her that the line between public duty and personal safety had shifted, and it would not return to how it was before. The first closed hearing involving Martin Hale took place without cameras or public notice. Only a short statement confirmed he remained in custody and would face multiple charges related to public endangerment and unlawful possession of the device. What stayed out of public view was the details shared with senior royals later that day. Hale had admitted he acted alone, but investigators were not fully convinced. His statements changed often, and at times he spoke as if someone else would finish what he started. That alone was enough to keep everyone on edge. William was briefed first, then Catherine later that evening. She listened carefully, asking some key questions. She wanted to know whether any communications had gone unanswered, whether anyone had encouraged Hale, even indirectly. The answer was unclear. Investigators had found online forums where Hale posted under different names, testing ideas, seeking attention, and watching reactions. No clear handler appeared, but the pattern suggested he wanted an audience, not just an outcome. This troubled Catherine more than open hostility would have. An enemy you can see is easier to guard against than someone who wants to be noticed. She said quietly that attention itself could become a weapon, and asked whether limiting coverage of her movements might reduce risk. Advisors agreed, and plans were adjusted again, reducing exposure without pulling her from public life entirely. King Charles called another private meeting, this time including Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, William, and Catherine. The discussion was direct. Charles acknowledged that Catherine had become one of the most trusted faces of the monarchy, especially during uncertain times. That trust, he said, carried weight and also danger. Anne pushed harder, saying trust could never replace vigilance and that the system must change before routine failed again. Catherine spoke last. She said she understood the risk, but believed retreat would send the wrong message.
Lots of people who are suffering with, addiction or poor mental health, and hearing time and time again that...
She reminded them that her work centered on children and families who already lived with fear and uncertainty. Pulling back too far, she said, would feel like turning away from them. The room fell quiet after that. No one argued. Instead, they focused on how to protect her while allowing her to remain visible. Soon after, Catherine carried out one of her most carefully planned visits since the incident. It was a roundtable discussion with early years workers and local leaders. The setting was controlled, but the conversations were open. Catherine spoke about the need for stable environments, safe communities, and trust between institutions and families. Those listening noticed a deeper edge to her words. It was as if recent events had sharpened her sense of urgency. She did not mention the attack, but its influence was clear. Security teams watched closely as she moved through the building, greeting attendees, listening more than she spoke. Officer Lewis remained nearby, his presence calm but alert. He had been part of the response that day in Windsor, and Catherine recognized him with a nod. It was not gratitude for protection alone, but acknowledgement of shared understanding. They both knew how close things had come. Behind the scenes, another development raised concern. Investigators discovered Hale had visited a second location weeks before the incident. The place was close to a future royal engagement that Catherine had not yet attended.
I've seen that experiences such as homelessness, addiction, and poor mental health.
The visit appeared harmless at the time, but now it suggested planning beyond a single moment. That information was shared quickly with palace officials, prompting another review of upcoming events. Several appearances were altered or postponed, though the public was given routine explanations. Catherine accepted the changes, but privately questioned how many plans Hale had considered before choosing Windsor. The idea that she might have crossed his path before, without knowing, unsettled her. She spoke to William about it late one night, wondering how often visibility mixed with vulnerability. William admitted he had thought the same, especially where their children were concerned. That shared worry drew them closer, even as it weighed heavily. Meanwhile, public reaction continued to build in quiet ways. Letters arrived by the hundreds, many expressing concern, others gratitude for her calmness after the incident. Catherine read some of them herself, touched but careful not to dwell. She knew public support could lift, but it could also feed the kind of attention that people like Hale sought. And as the days passed, one final detail came up that shifted the tone again. Investigators confirmed that Hale had failed to trigger the device due to a simple mechanical flaw, not hesitation. The device had been ready. Timing alone had spared lives. That fact was shared with Catherine in private, and it stayed with her. It turned a near miss into something closer to fate, and it made the responsibility she carried feel heavier than before. Catherine did not change how she appeared in public, but something inside her settled into place. She moved forward with clarity, knowing the risk was real, the threat had been close, and the system was still learning. The final hearing came quietly, without crowds or headlines outside the court. Martin Hale stood before the judge looking smaller than the fear he had caused. His words were flat and his explanations thin. He admitted building the device, admitted planning the moment, and admitted he wanted to be seen. There was no larger group, no secret handler waiting in the background. He was just a man who believed getting close to power would give his life meaning. The court did not accept excuses, and he was sentenced to a long term in custody. When the news reached the palace, Catherine did not react with relief right away. She listened, thanked those who informed her, and then asked whether the reviews had truly changed how things worked. The answer was yes. Access rules were rewritten, monitoring was ongoing, and information about royal movements was now shared on tighter timelines. It was not perfect, but it was better, and that mattered to her. King Charles called Catherine later that evening. He spoke warmly, telling her the family was proud of how she had handled everything. This was not just the danger, but also the days that followed. He said she had shown steadiness when it was needed most.
It's really important to stress it. We can't take a fatalistic outlook on this either, for those who haven't had.
Catherine thanked him, but said the credit belonged to those who reacted quickly and those willing to learn from mistakes. She had never liked praise that ignored the bigger picture. The next morning, Catherine returned to public work. She came to a small community center, greeted staff, and sat with parents discussing everyday struggles. There were no references to courts or devices, only listening, nodding, and gentle questions. To those in the room, she was simply present, focused, and engaged. What they did not see was the strength behind that calm. William watched from a short distance, aware of the balance she had found. She had not hardened, but she had not remained unchanged either. She understood now, more than ever, that visibility carried weight and that leadership meant showing up, even when fear tried to pull you back. As Catherine left that day, a child waved at her, and she waved back, smiling in the same way she always had. Life moved on, but not blindly. The system was sharper, the family more aware, and Catherine herself more resolved. The danger had passed, but the lessons stayed, shaping every step that came next. What do you think? Did this incident change how you see Catherine and the quiet strength she carries every day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.